what I'm finding is that people are talking, once they've read the book, Maker's Life, they're talking and talking about how they're makers and their history of making. And I've had so many incredible conversations just in this week with people of all ages. And I have a wide variety of friends of all different ages, and they're all talking about it. It's some of them have heard them say, I didn't think of myself as a maker, but I've been a maker for a long time.
Welcome to MakeCast. I'm Dale Dougherty with Make Magazine, and I am meeting with the authors of A Maker's Life, Authentic Makerspaces, Knowing Your Why for Making a Reflective Workbook Guide for Developing a Makerspace. I want to welcome Marilyn, Nash, and Amber Hudson. How are both of
Thank
you doing
you.
today?
Oh, good, good.
So good.
So, Amber, why don't you give us some context to start and maybe how this book came to be written?
I think it's a fun story. I'm happy to share. So I met Dr. Nash through the business that I work in, which is First Makerspace. I am the Vice President of Educational Services for their team. And we build out and design makerspaces, mainly in educational settings. And one of our clients happened to be the school that Dr. Nash was working for at the time. And we created this beautiful space for her to be in. And so my first introduction to her was on the day that we installed the makerspace. And all that I knew about her going into it was that she loved Lego. And it was a fun experience because we very much personalize our spaces and we try our very best to get to know our clients on a very personal level. And so we went up to do the installation. My coworker Kara had made her some homemade Lego cookies. And Adam, who works for First Makerspace, had designed and built this beautiful Lego desk. And that's what I remember most about her on that first day, was just introducing her to the space and the things that were being installed. And she was thrilled and excited about it. And over the course of time, then I revisited that space a few times for professional development, which is what I do as a part of the First Makerspace team. And so we had opportunities to sit down together and work through some new pieces of equipment and learning how these things would work with the students that she was teaching on a daily basis. And so we just formed this partnership of agreeing that we would help each other out when she needed it. And that just developed into a friendship, honestly. What was initially just a maker manager relationship that we had developed out into this friendship. And she approached me one day and said, "Hey, I'm working on this project and would like to put this book out into the world. Would you be willing to help?" And so that kind of took us on a whole new path where we dove into this book. She had started with this narrative that was so beautiful and just wanted to tell the story of the importance of making in her own life. And I'll let her talk about that more.
Yeah.
But I came alongside with this also as a fellow educator, just being able to provide some insight into what this looks like, what I had seen work well and not work well as a person who's living in this makerspace world, and provided a bit of insight into the research part of why making is important and the history of where it's come from. That then led us to create this beautiful book that is physically beautiful. We love it so much, but is a true resource that we hope will help others who are starting their makerspace journey, or if they've been in it for a while and they need ideas, we wanted to be able to provide some of that as well.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know where to start with you, so I'm just going to turn it over to let you run with it.
Okay, thank you very much. As we have continued to work through pieces related to the book, and Amber and I have met several times about all these little pieces that are related to the book that we're working on, we talked about that focus because the book is so much and it's so personal to me that I could make a list of probably 15 reasons why I wrote this book and started to work on it. And then thankfully, as Amber mentioned, partnered up with her, and her expertise and creativity really just exploded and helped us come to life. So I've been thinking about this, why this book and what does it mean to me? I think it comes down to this point of, I wanted to, in my experience of being a teacher in the classroom where making was non-negotiable, and then becoming a maker manager, I wanted to really understand my place as a maker and understand my why for doing it. And as I kept thinking, reflecting about that, it became such a grounding point, that epicenter of drive for being the best maker and providing the best makerspace learning for others possible. And so that's really where this whole piece lands for me. And what I found is that the more I understand myself and started realizing I've been doing this all my life, as I've mentioned a couple times, that I didn't call myself a maker. I obviously am not 20 or something. And so I've been a maker, a tinkerer, an artist, and the list of things I can do and have tried and experimented with is long. And some of that comes, I think, as a child and even a young adult, it came out of necessity, or even that's that mindset of that's what you do, kind of thing. When I was growing up, you didn't buy cards at the store, you made them for holidays or birthdays and events. You sat down and you made your card. That was just something you did. And I was raised with a mother who started writing in a diary back probably in the late 50s, early 60s. And we have a whole set of those in my family of diaries that she kept until she passed away about 10 or 12 years ago. And so it's a huge collection of these diaries, and we use it all the time in our families. Can you look up the such a date and see if that's when? So we just use that as a reference.
Very
So
interesting.
writing, and I wouldn't say Mom kept a journal per se. It was pretty much a diary of events and things. But I know there were times when she'd find a flower she loved and she'd press it into her diary, or she'd tape a certain little invitation in place. And so we were raised with, of course, you would write and reflect and think about your life and what you're doing and keep those things that are important to you, each of us, so that we have these benchmarks and landing places for our lives. And those things became very important in my life and my family's life because I can share several things where, for me personally, it became a lifesaver for me. It was a very healing experience.
Yeah, that's an expression you use in the book. It saved your life.
Mhm.
A profound statement.
Oh, very much. I know I literally wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't have my art that I was able to hide away with when I was a child in some very dark places. And even as a young adult, I had my oil painting and my watercolors that I could just focus on and share my feelings with myself. And it helped me go through those times and it really saved my life. It was healing for me. Even then the afterwards of sorting out who I am and who I was after those kind of experiences. And I can say that's true for several people in my family that have had the same experiences.
One of the things you say in your book on the cover here is just how this resource can inspire you to experiment, collaborate, and express yourself in ways you never thought possible. And I think a lot of what you were talking about too is it has to do with making a self-expression. And it's very powerful. And it isn't necessarily just yourself.
Correct.
You are communicating that
Mhm.
and around other people that are doing that. Self-expression doesn't mean you're by yourself
Yeah.
necessarily.
Oh, no,
And
it's
I just think I was at this thing yesterday where some kids that it was a making wellness exhibition. It was called. It was for kids that had struggled in school, been in juvenile hall, various places. And they were getting them just to make things. And they came on the idea that clothing was something can be very expressive. You can wear it. It's accessible and all these things from, canvas bags to hats to t-shirts and all that.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of obvious, but it's also true that a lot of kids don't have many opportunities to really express themselves in any authentic way.
Yeah.
no, no. And that's something I found then with my work was I just retired from 48 years in education and youth work. And during those decades of working with students, I always made sure we had an art center because I found that as I was speaking, they may start individually working on something, but then as they see themselves coming to life in an art piece, then it becomes part of a community of makers. And I think that connected piece with makers around you is also key. But students need that place to be safe, to be able to share and express themselves.
Exactly.
And it's just very important.
Yeah, no, it really is. But sometimes even kids themselves misunderstand art, right? I'm going to be an artist. You want me to be an artist. That's why you asked me to do this. No, we want you to
Yes. Be
express
creative.
yourself in some
Right,
way, right?
right.
Find something in you that means something to you.
I can speak to that too. I think
Yeah.
that I found in my own classroom as well. I also was a classroom teacher for over 20 years, and s- students are so scripted to do exactly what they're supposed to do in school every single day that there's very little time for them to have freedom to sit and think about what they might want to create or what they might want to do. And in my classroom, it was, we're going to have this hour on Friday that's going to be our makerspace time. And it was the short amount of time that I could squeeze into my education schedule, which we all wish was much different. But what I found great joy in was allowing them to have some freedom to choose. Here's this wall of materials, and you can go pick what you want and do what you want. And I actually sat down right next to them and made my own projects, which again was something that was very rare that happened in the classroom. But I so enjoyed it as the educator. It just was a time
Yeah.
for us to sit, and the conversations were fun. And it truly was the same collaborative effort, this idea of
Right.
sitting next to somebody who was making with me. And it didn't matter that they might be 10, but we were having these great conversations surrounded by the idea of just the freedom to create.
Yeah. And Marilyn, you're such a great example. This is something that you can do your whole life. And
Mhm.
it is your life. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Uh-huh, exactly.
People kind of question, like, what's the value of it? And sometimes, are you really?
Yeah.
Right. That's one of the things I have found with I was thinking just this week, it's like I don't want people to think I'm having little book clubs or something from the book or anything. But what I'm finding is that people are talking once they've read the book, Maker's Life, they're talking and talking about how they're makers and their history of making. And I've had so many incredible conversations just in this week with people of all ages. And I have a wide variety of friends of all different ages, and they're all talking about it. It's some of them have heard them say, "I didn't think of myself as a maker, but I've been a maker for a long time." Yeah.
I'd love to have an article in the magazine on that. It'd be really cool. In some ways, I thought after I started this meeting people, they made stuff, right? And they didn't make a big deal about it. They didn't say it, but I just wanted to share it with other people. And so when you're talking about that, it's like, gosh, wouldn't it be cool to see all those people? Like you could meet them individually, but to see them together with the
Yeah.
things that they make so that you could also see those things and then talk to them. They're a different person when those things
Oh,
and close to
definitely.
them to be able
Yeah.
to share and talk about that. They don't want to give you
Personal.
their history or their those or that. What they
Mhm.
made is really important, and they want to. They light up when they talk about it.
I've seen that both, and I'm sure Amber has too. I've seen that in the classroom, and I feel like I'm really seeing it now with my friends and family who are getting very excited about being makers. In one of our other conversations, Dale, you mentioned a phrase that has just been seared into my like personhood, and that's the phrase generational makers. And that was one of those moments that I remember. I'll give an illustration of when I was in a classroom. I had bought a whole lot of magnetic marbles for the kids for their science lab that week. And I'd given them little trays and these magnetic marbles. And I said, let's make designs. And I was sitting with them, as Amber's mentioned, I'd sit with the kids and do their projects. And this one little boy was getting particularly frustrated because magnetic marbles tend to have a mind of their own. But he was working really hard to get this design made. And in the process of him working, one of the other students came by and accidentally, very gently actually, bumped into the desk where he was sitting. And I'll never forget that moment when those marbles in that tray, thankfully they were in a tray, but they just all of a sudden started bumping. And I've never forgotten the clicking sound because once he stopped clicking, that little boy's face lit up because that's my design. I couldn't have made it if he hadn't come by and bumped into my desk. And that moment of when you have all these pieces and then something happens and they come together, that's what I was working on. And that's go back to that phrase, generational makers. That's been such a rich piece for me. And I see it, like I said, both in the school settings, whether I'm during PDs or working with children or I'm talking with family and friends, the excitement around making has been electrifying. It's just
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, I hear you. I have to think, like, my confession, I'm not a great maker myself, but I really key on the excitement. I call enthusiasm of makers that I just want to be around people like that. I want to learn from them. I want to see what they do. And it's genuine. So my questions often are like, why don't we have more of it? Why isn't school filled with it? Why is it 1 hour on a Friday
Yeah.
when, this is something, if it was
Mm-hmm.
so transformative, you would have it every day. You would have it often.
Yes.
You
Mm-hmm.
would have it outside of school, in school, you'd
Yep.
have it at home.
Yeah.
And I think people from a previous generation had more of it, sometimes out of necessity, about making greeting cards and things. It was just what you did. And it seemed ordinary to them. It was just, or as you say, you're handy, you know how to do things. It was an ordinary thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's extraordinary. And what I like about what you think of the generational makers, it should be ordinary in your life. It should be, but it doesn't mean it's not fun or exciting. A lot of things that we like do, we
There's
do
something-
over it. But I think that almost repetitive quality of it is a really part of the virtue.
Yeah.
It works time, in other words, right? It did work like on a
Right.
Monday, but not on a Friday.
One of the things that Dr. Nash talks about in the book is the influence that her parents had on her, but specifically her mom. And she shares these stories that she and her mom had about making things. And my mom and I had the exact same experience. And I laugh because when I was growing up in the 80s, my mom had it was a Time Life series of books, and each one was on home repair. There was a book on plumbing. There was a book on wallpapering. I remember I loved the books. I loved the colors of the books. I loved the pictures that were in the books. But my mom was the one that read those cover to cover. And she was the one in our house that fixed things and made things. And she took me out multiple times to go start a new project. And it was going out to the fields and picking flowers, and we'd press them or whatever it was. There were lots of different, but that was so impactful in my childhood. And Dr. Nash had the same experiences that we've now passed those on to our kids in whatever form of making they do. But if you didn't have that generational maker in your life, it doesn't mean that you can't start now. So, what is it that you are interested in, or find that passion and find the opportunities to go make?
And your workbook is a workbook guide for developing a makerspace. And I think the point is because it's not in a lot of kids or families to have this happening every day. A makerspace becomes a place where that can happen.
Yeah.
And the reason it belongs in schools because kids are there every day, or in the community because they go somewhere else. But, I understand what a makerspace is, probably too much, but for those that we might bring into this conversation that don't understand what it is, some people say, oh, well, they have arts and crafts in schools. Oh, or they have summer camp. Well, we have arts and crafts going on there. Well, it's really different here that you're doing with a makerspace. And why do we need to develop one and have it in our school or in our community?
I think for me, a makerspace, what I hope is a makerspace is around in many ways the engineering design process, where they understand I have a question or I have a problem or I need something fixed. Then think about how can you fix it? What are ways, how can we solve this problem? Try those ideas of how to fix it. See if they work. Iterate and kind
I'm
of
surprised by that answer. Well, it is for the educational side. I get that. Yeah.
of creating something. It may be a problem of I would like to create something. That may be the problem. It may be what you're working on. Maybe the place where you start. It could be you want to design something that moves and has motors or something. But you start with something. It could be, like I said, I want to create something, or here's the medium that I need to try and practice and see if I like it. It could be all kinds of things, but think through that. And I bring that up in the sense of I found students who work through that process gain confidence in I can do this. And that's why I brought that up. I saw so many examples of students who I've shared in the book about who had behavior or learning challenges or both. And they would come into the makerspace and I would give them a challenge. You have these magnetic tiles that you can use. I want you to build something. They had the freedom to decide what they were building, and they would start building and just get so excited about watching this come to life. And if it fell apart or it wasn't quite right or they need to change it, their confidence and focus melted all of those other challenges away so that they had that freedom and safety and joy and enthusiasm to build something. And I think for me, the makerspace at the school I was at, it had thousands and thousands of tools and variety of materials, thanks to First Makerspace for building such a cool space. But I can really make piles of things and say, today I want you to build a house using these materials. And to see kids think those through and then just explode with creativity. We used the Glowforge laser and cut out all the pieces for little houses. They worked on building the house, and then they had this huge cart full of hundreds of things that they could add to the house. And just that joy of making and exploring expression for me was electrifying and reminded me all of those whys in my life of I love making things. Endless.
Yeah. The reason I said it surprised me a little bit, 'cause I think some of it, to me, the basic making is to have an idea and be able to realize and learn how to take your own ideas seriously. And that's what I think kind of self-expression is a great place. Makers don't have to be limited to self-expression. There's the goal of projects, the engineering, design, other things, or really getting ideas from other people about what they might need and say, I know how to do that and turn it in. It is a remarkable thing when someone can imagine something in their head and then realize it so that they can share with another person and say, that was my idea.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. The ownership for that creative expression.
Just like it came from me.
That was me.
Beautiful
Yes.
thing.
Yeah.
I think, go ahead.
And for those kids who aren't able to, or comfortable or whatever, however you want to say it, to express themselves when they have that great moment and they have that piece that they've now made and they have that excitement, then they're able to share in ways not seen before, or even some of their educating people around them would expect them to do. And it just is a freeing moment. It frees kids to do all kinds of things.
My one idea of how I would change or organize school is to encourage kids to do projects based on their own ideas and interests. And sometimes your teachers say, what if they don't have any ideas? What if they don't have any interests? And I say, really? You don't think they don't have you ever engaged with kids on a very fundamental level? And, that may be the problem, is the way that you ask. Just like nobody likes to be asked out of the blue, sit down and draw something.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you mean? So you have to create an environment. And I think this is the key in the book, is maybe there's a bunch of things besides equipment and materials and tools that are important to create the environment where these conditions like creativity flourish, right? And people feel safe. They're not going to be like, there's not a right answer. I don't have to do these things, which is really different than school. And that's just when I really started thinking about Makerspace. I wanted it to be the kind of space that kids enter with a sense of wonder. What goes on here? There's not even rows of chairs here to sit down. I don't know where. And there's stuff on the walls that aren't just posters. There's stuff people make. What is that? What is that? How'd you make that? And there's tools. And so it generates a lot of questions. What do I get to do here? As opposed to, where do I sit?
You stole my answer. That's what I was going to
really?
say.
Sorry.
That's what I was going to say to your makerspace question, because I live in this world of designing out these spaces and what is the most valuable thing you can put in there. And it's not really the stuff, it's the atmosphere. Something different happens in this space. And it's probably my favorite part of watching kids walk into a space for the first time, and the oohs and ahs, because it does not and should not feel like a traditional classroom, because you want them to understand that things are different in the space, and the things you create in the space, there's something very valuable about the feeling of the freedom to, if I sit at this desk with this pencil, it might feel like I'm taking a test and I'm doing this worksheet. And that is what they do on a day-to-day basis in school. And sadly, it is limited in most educational settings, but boy, they can feel extra special when they go into a room that does have wooden tables and there are tools and the materials are there for creativity.
Yeah. And I think, just to jump it up a level, this is important to their future, right?
Yes.
They are asserting things. So not only their voice, but their ability to learn. I was talking to Lee Martin of Davis, who had written a paper on maker educational, but it was about adaptability, part of the maker mindset. Like, we don't know what the future is, but we know I'll need to be adaptable and figure out how to learn new things for that future. And it's a little thing that adds up to, I think, a big thing, which is self-directed learning, that I would wish on every child to
Right.
discover that because that's
Mhm.
when you really begin to grow and develop because you get to decide what you want to do, how you want to learn. And nobody can do that for you.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think both of you just hit on something that I keep thinking about as you're both talking is that I want to see that enthusiasm for the teachers and the educators because my experience has so often been that the and maker spaces and being a maker, it's put on top of this incredible workload and
Yeah.
Yes.
responsibilities teachers and educators have.
Yes.
And they're exhausted and are trying their
Yeah.
best to because you have formulas, X amount of time for language arts, math. Those are the emphasis of the day. There's a schedule and bells are going off. It's pretty ding 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 through the days. And I think that's partly why I know it's why I've been so enjoying the conversations with family and friends about the book because they're getting excited as adults. And I want that enthusiasm that I saw just explode with children in the makerspace and what we were talking about. And then they go back into these classrooms where they're back in those rows and the desks like you were talking about, Dale, and Amber was saying, no tables, or if there are, you're still in an assigned seat. And I understand that. I get that world. We have things that those students need and so on. But it's like a chokehold almost on
I think
breath,
so. But
take a breath.
I'm a pretty agreeable person. But when you start talking about the school system, I have this other side of me that I want to subvert it. I don't believe a lot of these rules and regulations have any purpose except
Mm-mm.
keep a bureaucracy busy. And I just think what we're doing here and talking about is what are the experiences kids have when they're young that help really them to grow and develop and blossom.
Yeah.
Compliance as an educational agenda is terrible.
And it's
We want to replace
challenging.
it with creativity and
Yeah.
discovery
How do
and
educators
exploration.
find that balance
Yeah.
of, I do have to walk this line of, I know that this is what is required of me, but I also know what is best for kids. And how do we walk that? How do we find that balance and
And
speak
again,
to,
it
yeah,
is that line they have to walk, but it needs to be questioned,
get the line
Mhm.
out of
Oh,
there. Yeah.
that's
and
right.
to
That's right.
say justified on what the kids' experience is. How do they learn best?
How
And
do we
they
show
do.
that value?
And
Yeah.
that's why I think so powerful often is to look at the kids that are not learning well in school, that aren't succeeding. And you
That's
say,
right.
what about them? And we've all seen this, but if you're doing maker programs, it's not the smartest kid in the class that's flourishing. Often they can and they
Yeah.
should, but often it's the kids who haven't had a chance to flourish.
Yeah.
Who haven't, and it's just an alternate but important way for them to find themselves, but find
Their
their
voice.
way,
Yeah.
and that they can do things. I think so much of it is about a degree of confidence and a sense of capability that you have this ability to do. You could develop it and get better at it rather than feeling defeated, feeling
That's right.
I'm not
Mhm.
as good as others. I'm not good at math or whatever it is.
Yes.
And you have to build your life on what you can do, not what you can't. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think there ought to be a church of making because these values, that's what we're trying to convey
Mhm.
here. So it's do this thing or that thing. It's just share these values as a community and lift people up.
Yeah.
That's
And I
right.
think
That's
that
right.
is, Dr. Nash and I agree. Like, I really think that's part of the reason for putting this book out to the public is that we want people to understand that education is highly valuable, but let's find that happy medium and let's share our experiences as educators and how we
Right.
can bring more making to the classroom and more
Yeah.
experiences that
Yeah.
expose them to those careers that they
Right. Because,
hopefully
Mhm.
again, you're
pursue.
talking about the educator walking the line. Just again, you have to sometimes just use your imagination and say, what if they didn't have to walk that line?
Yeah.
Right. And you had
That's
a
right.
really creative school full of kids that were flourishing.
Yes.
That's really the
Right.
goal here.
Yep.
And we
Exactly.
do see it, but we see it for moments
Yeah.
sometimes, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And we
Yep.
imagine how do you sustain that and how do you get
Mhm.
a lot of people in there? Well, one of the things that Amber, you said you tried to bring to the book was because it comes up then, what's the research behind this or what's the science of learning?
Mhm.
We could bring people like Marilyn and others that say it's meant so much to me. It's my fundamental to my experience of life and things. And people say yes, but what's the science behind it? So tell me what you found here.
What's the research? It's been really interesting kind of diving into this because and this won't be any surprise, but there isn't a lot of research that supports makerspaces and hands-on learning since COVID. I want to find who's the
Yeah.
new person
Yeah.
out there speaking to this and supporting it. And so we have this gap right now. But I think that every piece of research that I find comes back to this one particular piece that I love the most is that learners remember 75% of what they do versus 5% of what they hear. And does it get any more impactful than that? And so it's driving what this idea of what Piaget and what Montessori and some of
Can
those,
Dewey.
we call
If-
them the founding fathers of the maker movement.
Yeah.
Like they really
And-
were preaching to this. And
But
there's
you know,
something to that.
But Montessori's always been an inspiration just because things how we always think of her kindergartner. She actually was a medical doctor and was original was seeing kids locked up in mental institutions, young kids, and they didn't think they could learn.
Right.
And there's a story she tells of how the caretakers threw their food at them. No, look how they're playing with their food and making fun of them. And she began to work with them and prove that they can learn. We all learn. It's natural.
Yep.
And I think we need to remember that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes school looks like, well, there's only our way to learn.
Correct. Yes.
And the
Yes.
kids have that. And it's sad because you see it in the younger kids and they start losing those sparks as they get older in the conventional, traditional environment. But ones like Dewey and stuff had these realizations. I'll just put it out there. This is 100-year-old body of work. You know?
Yes.
Erased it, forgotten it. We don't give it credit. In fact, I'd say your point is we don't even research it anymore. But there really is a lot of ways about how our brain works and how kids, when they're active, you just take active version. This is one of my favorite things. Don't you think kids are doing better when they're active than when they're passive sitting there?
Yeah.
You know, and there's never been a conference like the Passive Learning Conference, which promotes passive learning.
That's right.
So
But
true.
that's our dominant mode. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
That's,
That's right.
what
That's
we
right.
do. It's like everybody went to that conference.
Yeah,
All the
exactly.
other better ones.
Exactly. There's a quote in the book, in fact, that says kids won't climb the walls if you take the walls away.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about the Montessori, I have a little boy I'm tutoring right now several times a week. And his report from school that I received when I started tutoring him, this little boy's at 0, 0, 0. Again, I know he's in a classroom and nothing against the school or the teacher or anything like that, but it's sit right. And I quickly discovered, because I have Montessori tools, I have the sand tray, I have the little sand block letters and things like that. This little boy, I think I've been working with him about 7 weeks, he's gone from getting zeros on a list of words he's supposed to know to now he knows 75% of them because he's been able to touch the letters. He's been able to work in the sand with the words. And it's that tactile piece that we bring to back to whole making, you know.
Yeah, in my book, I wrote it and I just made it up. But to be honest, I said kids often have a tactile deficit syndrome to know, that they haven't had to know that they have not enough sense using their senses. And Montessori talks about education of the senses. And it's like we take it for granted. That you acquire these things. Doing wet felting at a maker fair. And the amazing thing isn't what kids make. It's like how happy they are to put their hands in water. Like when you think of some of the fundamentals that get missed because kids are on a device, and their flat world experience is that. I think nature also has that quality too, getting kids out in the world. And to me, maker isn't some special category of thing. It's actually just having a life full of rich experiences, right?
That's right.
And that are engaging and motivate us and enrich us. Right. And so the problem I had really with school is that the quality of experience is so poor that we end up saying we have a mental health or social emotional learning problem. Well, the school has a problem that's creating that in kids, or just a symptom of it, other than it's something the kids are carrying.
That's right. That's right. Like you said earlier, there's such a separation. If like schools will have their plays, or schools will have their musical performances, or they'll have their from the building where the school I was at, they had maker nights, but it was always created after school or it's separate. It's not seen together. And it kind of goes back to the comments about educators and teachers making or being makers or maker spaces feels like it's put on top of everything or over here on alongside of things. It's not integrated into, of course. I remember numerous times we would get through the day and because I always like to have fun. And so my goal is to make the learning fun and having a blast. And I remember numerous times kids would be getting ready at the end of the day and like, Dr. Nash, we didn't have math today. And yes, we did. Remember when we were doing such and such? Oh, that was math. Just to look at things so differently like that. That
Yeah.
first of all, to have fun, and then that there are ways to have tactile sensory experiences when you're learning traditional information.
Yes.
I get lost. I get bored to death. And if I get bored, I've lost kids at least a month ago. And so that was always my goal. But I think what we see in schools, and you've both kind of been talking about it, is that this whole world of expression and making and maker spaces, it's either on top of what you're doing and becomes a resentful piece and goes away when, you're not held accountable, which kind of already puts an edge to it, or it's done after school, or it's done in the evening, or it's like a thing the music teacher takes care of, or it's something the art teacher does. It goes back to something we were mentioning earlier, Dale, is that I'd say all the time, and I had a poster in my room, everyone is a maker. And it was always interesting, the conversations. And I even say that today to people, everyone's a maker. And they're like, oh, not me. And they're like, yes. And again, in the book, I have the line, we're creators from a creator.
Yeah.
Of course we're
Yeah.
makers.
Yeah. Well, it is funny. I said that once and gave a talk with that name on it. And it's the way I describe it, it's a belief, right?
Mhm.
And I believe this. And
Yeah.
people are better if I believe that, or I'm a better person if I believe that. And if I believe they're not, or there's only a few of them in the world. And I think our beliefs motivate us and drive us to do things. I would love to see like you and your book go into like senior centers and places and have this conversation with them,
Yeah.
That's
And
right.
I've seen some of the most effective PD or professional development for teachers is simply to get them together making things and listen to them, not tell them anything, but just listen how they talk to each other. And they'll inevitably say, my kids would like this. I like it.
Yes.
I used to do this as a kid and I could do this more. So it's like, those
That's
are the
right.
major points you would want to get across.
Yeah.
Go
And
ahead
they've forgotten.
and
They've forgotten that they
get it,
can.
but
That's right. That's right.
yeah, and
So
it hasn't been encouraged. And that's where I think, your book and the whole kind of maker movement is just encourage people. This is really important. Our culture doesn't appreciate it. Our school systems don't appreciate it. Doesn't mean it's not valuable though. And
Right. That's
and so I really respect what you're doing. But I think it's such a wonderful thing also for older folks. I have to tell you, one of the ideas I had starting Make Magazine 20 years ago was that I was a lot younger, but thinking all of us need to play, not just the kids. Right?
absolutely.
Find things, and the older you get, maybe you get control of your life a little bit more. You get time. Start saying, well, how can I spend my time effectively? And playing, creating, making the state of mind it puts you in, right?
Right.
And the kind of energy it gives you and the kind of optimism is all things that comes from this.
Joy.
That's
Right. I think watching TV or being on doom scrolling or whatever people say. When you're doing something, making something, you lose track of time.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right?
absolutely.
And it's just, where'd the last hour go? And
Yeah.
That's right.
That's
right.
your hour. That was yours.
That's
And
right.
Look what you did with it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Very special.
That's right.
Very special.
That's right. That's right. And one of the things when you were talking about sharing with older, more mature people, on Wednesdays, now that I'm retired, I have the opportunity on Wednesdays. I'm in a game club, specifically Mahjong with Chinese tiles, and we play Mahjong rounds for 4 hours and just talk and talk. I've been doing as much as I could before I retired, and now I've been able to do it every week now. And I've really grown to love these. There's 4 of us, and 2 of the women, we don't ask their age, but we do know that they're probably around 84 to 85 years old. And I gave them, this is probably about 3 weeks ago, I gave them both a complimentary copy of A Maker's Life. I said, this is for you. I signed it for them. They were just so appreciative. Well, the next week when we met for Game Club, one of the women came in and she goes, I am angry with you, Marilyn. I'm like, which I thought, oh gosh, this can't be good. And I said, oh, okay. And of course, my sister who's there, she was like, I need to go to the bathroom. And I'm like, oh, I got after her later, like, you can't walk out when someone comes in like that. But we started laughing because I said, okay, what did I do now? And she said, I've been reading your book, Marilyn. Both of them are retired teachers. And she said, I've been retired for probably 40 years. And she goes, would think she might be older. But anyway, she goes, I was reading your book. I started writing down notes. I started making little comments in the margins because I didn't want to forget anything that you had said. And she says, I had to make myself stop and remind myself, I'm not going to school tomorrow. She goes, but it was so exciting to read your book and to think about myself as a maker.
Yeah.
Now I've got some new projects going. And
That's
so,
great.
oh, okay, that I can get in trouble for.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was
I
just,
don't know how I
was-
agree you need to be to do that, but it's great.
I've been talking to them because of these conversations with them. I've asked them, I said, would you please write down, describe yourself as a maker. What is you like as a maker? And it brings it back to me, and that personal lifeline for me has been. And
Yeah.
It's one of the things I notice when you start making something, you talk about it and you find other people that you connect to on that. So it becomes the conversation sometimes when you're making, and sometimes with outside of that, but it gives you something to talk about.
Yeah.
And it's just,
Yep.
it's interesting. People care. And
Well,
And
listen-
a connection with a human soul. Yeah.
definitely.
Thank you both for joining me, and thanks for writing the book, and good luck with it. I really hope it gets into the hands of people that may not expect to think of themselves as makers.
Yes.
That's right. That's right. I'm working on it.
That is our hope.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Dale.